The next article is a petition article, Municipal Fleet Electrification Report, Brian Folds. Brian.
Hello. Oh,
It's coming.
it's coming. Oh, there it is. So, Brian Folds, 33 Riverdale. I'm here to do a citizen's petition to get another report. Hopefully a last one. So, the article is to look at our current fleet for the town and to have the department heads write a report on how we're going to fulfill a goal of electrifying that fleet. And the theme for this presentation is going to be about taking actions. So I'll go through it. So here is the wording of the article. This appears a couple times in the presentation, so I'm not going to read through it. I'll go through that later. If you don't know me, I have worked on a few committees in town. I tend to focus on sustainability efforts. And, this has happened while my kids have been growing up. I've had time while they go to our schools and get a great education. But one of the first committees I was on was to look at the drivetrains of school buses. And that work led me into working with the Energy Futures Task Force. And I'm currently the chair of the Climate Action Advisory Board, but I'm not acting on their behalf. This is my own petition. And and I've helped people since about 2011 with solar, electric cars, and other things. So in the media, we hear a lot about climate change. And a lot of people say, oh, it was 63 degrees today. It's February. That's wonderful. I like warm weather. And it's a good joke. But really, climate change, as the National Security Department labeled it, is a threat multiplier. It doesn't make things, it makes things a little worse, and it's because it adds energy to systems. So whether it be more ticks in your backyard, or whether it be heat strokes from hot days, or whether it be flood events from heavy rains and downpour, that all has to do with the ability of the atmosphere to hold more energy. And you can read that list there of some of the effects. And if you look at that map on the right there, that's from a study, an academic paper done, that looked at the carbon footprint of individuals in certain towns. And you can see that urban people generally have a lower personal carbon footprint, and people in rural areas also tend to have a lower carbon footprint than suburban people. And in the US, we have a very high per capita footprint to begin with. China is leading us in a total, but as individuals, they have a lot more people. That's why they're leading. And the governor has started to address this, our Republican governor. And these are a couple quotes from his State of the Commonwealth address, where he is changing the target from an 80% reduction by 2050 to a net zero goal for 2050, which is a 100% reduction. And the reason he's doing this is because we need to take decisive action. We need to not keep setting goals and promises, but actually start to show action. And I lost the presentation because I hit the wrong button. There we go. And this is why. So what you see here is a chart from NOAA that shows our increasing concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, increasing nitrogen oxides, increase in methane, and the chlorofluorocarbons and so forth. But we keep setting goals with the Paris Climate Accord, with other big goals that we set, but the proof is in the scientific measurements, and they have not turned those charts around. So what can Concord do? Concord has done an analysis of our carbon footprint as a town in 2008 and 2016. Over that 8-year period, we reduced our carbon footprint as a town by 6%. Not very impressive, seeing most of those gains came from fuel efficiency standards and things that were out of our control that happened anyway. But we did put a lot of effort in to make things happen. But this quote here is from a consultant's report on this data that said that if we decarbonize our electricity and we switch half of our vehicles over to electricity and half of our home heating over to that electricity, a 60% reduction. I think everyone in this room in the next 30 years is going to buy a car to replace their current car. In the next 30 years, they'll buy a new furnace. So we need to have a plan on how to help people switch from what they do today to a different fuel. Not compromise in what they do, but just fuel it differently. And so here are the town goals that currently exist. We have a goal of a 25% reduction by 2020, and with the Article 50 passage in 2017, we've actually accomplished that. And it's due to decarbonizing our electricity. It's very cheap and very easy to do, and really knocks down our carbon footprint. An 80% reduction by 2050. The light plant has a strategic plan of getting 5,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025. And we're doing quite well. We've got over 400 residents in town with electric vehicles that are being adopted at the rate that we'd like them to be to hit that target. And there was some other studies, but what's happening is the town is not leading by example. I'll show you, this is our current clean vehicle fleet. Out of the 100+ vehicles that we have in our fleet, we have an electric school bus, we have 2 Nissan Leafs, and an 8-year-old Ford Focus electric that the light plant bought way back in 2012, which all are great. And we've converted F-250 for the DPW and the bus for the Council on Aging to hybrids to increase their fuel efficiency. And the police department has a couple plug-in hybrids now, so they reduce their idling. These are all great things, but the total number is 8 vehicles out of 100+ in the town. And this affects us. This affects public health. Living next to roadways, the EPA and other health agencies have identified that people who live near highways, they get affected by the smoke that comes out of our tailpipes. These are negative health outcomes. And so what will this report help us do? It'll help departments work together on best practices for transition, for adopting electric vehicles, and understanding what's out there from their coworkers. There's lists of vehicles available today, from big heavy vehicles, whether it be a school bus or a garbage truck, down to Nissan Leafs and little vehicles. There's a lot of options out there, but people don't know about them. So we also need to know what are the roles and responsibility of different departments. One of the issues is electric vehicle infrastructure. Should that be something that the light department is putting in under ratepayers' money, or is that something that taxpayers through the departments in the town budget should be putting in that infrastructure? And in general, we need a plan to say, if we're going to electrify these 100-some-odd vehicles in our fleet, how are we going to lay out that infrastructure and what projects make sense? Let's not do a charger every time we buy a car and start doing trenching. Let's put the investment in to do one project, get it done right, and then buy the cars to fill it in. And why now? Why is it so important that we start to have this plan and start to execute on this? The cost of batteries right now for a 1 kilowatt-hour battery is about $156. That is down from almost $1,200 10 years ago. These lithium-ion batteries are getting cheap fast, which means more options are coming available, and we can do this. Financially, reasonably, we can do this. It has lower maintenance costs, lower fueling expenses, there's other good benefits, but that purchase price used to be the barrier based on the batteries. So I kind of hit this a little earlier, but having a plan for our charging infrastructure throughout the buildings and towns and different departments. Vehicle to grid is a new technology where we can use the batteries on these vehicles to discharge back into the grid when we're all running our air conditioners and have that peak time. That will lower the rates that we get charged at the light plant because we're lowering those peak expenses. So that's technology that we can do, but we need to have the infrastructure and the vehicles in place to access them. And here is the outline in my article that urges, by the way. So I didn't want to lock anyone into doing anything. I want this idea to go forward. It doesn't have to be exactly what I envisioned on day one, but I've urged the select board to do something along these lines, which is establish a baseline of our vehicles, where they are, how many we have, identify potential alternatives that are electric, assess the infrastructure needs, identify potential funding sources, grants, and other kinds of tax funding opportunities, identify what the barriers are. I know that we're not going to find a patrol car that is electric. They have the police department requires those vehicles have a 75 mile an hour crash rating for a rear impact. They don't have one of those in electric yet. They have 11 vehicles that qualify, and they're all really poor in efficiency. The police department just got a hybrid, which is great, but it's 24 miles per gallon. It's not really. It's great that it's the best option they had, and they should be able to do that when they need it and meet their needs. But if one becomes available, we should take a strong look at it and be prepared to do so. And then conclude with a pathway forward to start to electrify this fleet at a faster rate. Because change happens quickly. You can see in the top picture there, 1900 on Fifth Ave in New York City, there is one car, and all the rest are horses and wagons. 13 years later, you can only find one horse. They're all cars. That's how quickly change can happen. And this here is a forecast from the working group over at the light plant about our adoption rate of these electric vehicles as residents. So yeah, change can happen quite quickly, especially when the price of the battery really drops. And finally, I want to say that there are plenty of resources available. So the one in yellow there is the town website where you can find all kinds of information as a resident. Everything else on there is some kind of financial incentive. And if you want to, you can go afterwards to the website, and the PDF has links to all of my references and all of these available options. And that's the wording of my article.
Thank you very much.
Available for questions.
Are there any questions from the select board? Questions from the audience? Ms. Hartner.
D. Ortner, 169 Thoreau Street. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Brian, my question to you is, how much time do you think that this activity would entail?
I don't think it's definitely less than a year, probably just a few months.
So your planning cycle would be from the time of town meeting, if it's approved, probably within before the next town meeting, you would have a plan in place.
Well,
You're hopeful.
I'm hopeful that I'm urging the select board to have a plan in place, and I've offered my help to write this because I do know a lot of the content of this. And it's the act of having everybody sit around the table for all the departments and then coming up with a plan. That's what I want to see happen. And that shouldn't take more than a year. So I would say, it should be done by.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right, then our next, sorry.
Mark White, 233 Independence Road. In general, what's the cost difference between a electric or a fossil fuel vehicle? Say, for instance, a school bus.
The school bus is, so I'll give you a couple examples.
Very quickly.
A real quick one. All right. A Gulf, there's a direct comparison where there's an electric version and there's a gas version. There is a small increase, a couple $1,000s to buy the one with the battery, but there's also a state incentive and a federal incentive that make it actually cheaper to buy that one. So those kind of vehicles, it's actually less expensive to do the electric version. With the school buses, they are quite expensive. I don't expect us to go forward if it's very expensive. They're about 3 to 4 times the cost of a normal bus, and so we would need to get a grant, and that's what my other article, Article 30, is to address.
So if the costs are similar for the cars, why not simplify the process and just ask the towns that whenever a vehicle needs to be replaced, to make it an electric vehicle as opposed to a gas? And it would just be a simpler process with less manpower for the committees.
Yeah, there are towns that do that. There are things in place, which is our electric first only policies. That could be one way to go. I think that it's more important for us to develop a plan than to require each individual department to figure it out on their own. I think we need to break out of the silos and talk more. I think it would be a better result. How about that?
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you very much, Brian.